For those of you who were here last week, or wherever we were on this worship call, I pointed out that we were beginning the first of 7 parables, one right after the other, in the 13th chapter of Matthew's Gospel. And so this morning we get the second one. And I was saying that one of the amazing things about Jesus's parables is they're all grounded in everyday life experiences that the first hearers were quite familiar with. And it would all make sense to them until they get to the punchline, so to speak. And then Jesus would throw in this element that was fantastical or surreal or just had them scratching their heads going, what is he talking about? To get their attention and make them think. And so this week's gospel is no exception. It picks up on that same well-known occurrence of people sowing seeds. It goes in a little different direction. Now, on our Right 3, I usually have our kids come up and join me, and it's supposed to be shorter and sweeter and more interactive. Well, we can't do that, but maybe I could be a little bit interactive. So let me ask, and if you want to answer this, just unmute for the answer and then mute back again. What do you think is the surprise element in this parable? What were the original hearers not expecting to hear in this story? Any thoughts?
Weeds.
Pardon me?
Weeds.
What about the weeds?
They were surprised to see them there.
Well, I mean, Jesus says that they were planted purposefully.
To leave the weeds in.
Aha.
Not to weed your garden.
I think they probably, even though it seems strange to us, if you said, well, would somebody really go and plant weeds to destroy somebody's crops? You know, unfortunately, people have been pretty evil from the beginning. And I think they could have said, yeah, if they had a grudge against them, sure, they'd do that, want to ruin their crops. But what they weren't expecting was when the slaves came and said, shall we pull the weeds out? And Jesus says, no, let them grow together. And if we had been listening last week, we would have known why that's surprising, because remember, that was one of the scenarios that some seed falls on ground and begins to grow, but the weeds come up, and what do? They choke and stunt its growth, so it doesn't produce the crop. So they're like, what do you mean? We're not gonna have a good crop. But you see, every story that Jesus told was to make a point. And his point in this one was, do not try to separate the good from the bad, but let them grow together. Why? And here again, we often miss this because, and there is an allegorical interpretation that Matthew pins onto this one, just like last week. At the end, he gathers the wheat into his barn, and he gathers the weeds and burns them. And we usually think of that as, oh, those are the ones that are going to hell and burn. But think about it. It's ironic because the enemy wanted to do him harm, but he provided for him fuel. He had fuel to burn. And so the point being that God uses both the good and the bad, puts them to good use. And the other thing that I love about Jesus's parables is that, you know, there are these surprise elements for the people who first heard them, and sometimes we have to be explained because it's not our world that we live in. On the other side of that, the parables are so rich that 2,000 years later, we can have aha moments that the original hearers would not have gotten at all, because it wasn't part of their understanding and experience. And I think for 21st century followers of Jesus, the big aha is that this story is not so much about one little parcel of land and how somebody tried to do harm to it to hurt the owner, but that this whole planet is the parcel of land. And there has been an enemy who has sowed seeds of destruction, seeds that have grown to throttle and choke both the land, the sea, and the air. And to quote Pogo, we have seen the enemy, and the enemy is us. This is why the creation is groaning, as Fiona read, is groaning. We have caused this current situation. The ancients would not have known that the earth was so hurting, but we see it. And yet, the original good news of that parable still applies to us. God doesn't want to root us out, but wants us to grow together with the earth. Why? Because God isn't finished with us, and God has a purpose for us. God can burn away that dross of our hearts to help us be the ones, even though we have planted the destruction, we can be the ones who bring the healing. And, you know, we keep talking in our auction about the silver linings of this pandemic, and they just seem to be abounding all around. I'm sure you noticed that when we were in the height of our lockdowns, our quarantines, it wasn't only the scientists who noticed, but everyday people began to immediately, just after a few weeks, see how the earth was responding to our cars not being on the highways and our less of our human footprint. Even the gondoliers in Venice could see the bottom of the canal. The smog in Beijing dissipated. This happened all over the planet. And we tend to get so depressed and say, oh, there's nothing we can do about all this climate stuff. You know, what can we do? It's so huge. And this virus has showed us, even at the time it is humbling and knocking humanity to his knees, it's bringing healing to the planet. But it's shown us that we can make a difference. We can make a difference. And that's why the creation groans with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. Because the children of God are the ones who will respond to the earth's groaning, who will make that difference. And if we could make a difference in a few weeks, think if collectively what would happen if we put our minds to it for a few months or years or decades. Let us celebrate the beauty of the creation all around us. Let us express our sorrow and remorse for the harm we have caused it, but let's not sit in that sorrow. Let us look to God's promise to use all of us, even when we've been acting as enemies, planting seeds of destruction. Let God burn away the dross so that we can make a difference. And what a difference can be made. Ah, mercy, mercy me. Amen.